Welcome to the Brewers Institute podcast. I'm your host, Michael Capaldo. I'll speak with experienced brewery owners who have launched and grown their own brewing business. I'll share their wins, mistakes, and share advice on what they do differently next time. Welcome, Scott Overdorf, to the program. How are you, Scott?
Yeah, well, Michael, thanks. How are you?
Good, mate. Good. Thanks so much for joining us for this podcast for the Brewers Institute. It's really special to be able to interview. I've been drinking your beers for many years, and really appreciate you contributing to our program.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Should before we get into conversation, should we have a beer?
Yoo-hoo! Cheers.
Cheers indeed. What have you got over there?
I have a can of our Harbor Master,
Lovely.
the beer we launched the brewery with.
So I have a can of your pale.
Oh, it's
I got this specially shipped over from Tassie from a mate of mine, so I could have it ready for this podcast.
Well, that's a good friend indeed that would do that.
Yeah. So Harbor Master's the beer that started the brewery, huh?
Yeah, yeah. When we started, it's I guess, yeah. There we go.
I love that. Here we go. Ching ching.
Um, it's a pretty special moment for any brewer who's, able to brew the very first beer for a new brewery. And, when Brendan and I were starting up back then, pale ale was the top selling style in Australia. And I think we just kind of both agreed that the world didn't need another American style pale ale. And we set out to brew something that kind of sat in that space, but was, I guess, spoke a little more about the rich brewing history of Tasmania.
Yeah. So for our brewers who don't know the Harbor Master, I've had many of them. Can you explain style of beer and what it's like?
Yeah, and it's one of those beers that wasn't really brewed to any particular style. It was more of, we looked at Hobart and Tasmania in general and what the beers might have been, 100, 150 years ago. And so Harbor Master has a grain bill that is more akin to an English style beer to kind of pay homage to that history of brewing in Tassie, but modernized with hops grown up the road in Bushy Park. So it features Cascade, Vic Secret, and Ella hops.
Yeah, cool. And from a malt bill perspective, it's always been pretty on the reddish side, like dark copper sort of side. Like, have you got some crystal malts in there as well?
We do, and that beer color is perhaps one of my favorites. And when you see it, it just looks like the color. It just starts talking about malt character and richness. And in today's world with hoppy beers being kind of dominant and almost stripping back the malt so the hops shine through. Every once in a while, and I do enjoy those beers. But every once in a while, I do enjoy having, kind of a malt forward beer as well.
Yeah, amazing. I can't agree with you more.
Mm.
So let's talk. We've only met in person once.
Yeah.
Do you remember when that was?
Yeah. Well, I'd say it was around hop harvest season. Yeah, around 2018. At one of the local watering holes, that everybody seems to migrate to, the Winston.
That's right.
And
Yep.
doing some sensory around the new harvest with some, sniffing and rubbing, and which is always an exciting time. Harvest time. Fall is definitely the best time of year. It's my favorite season anyway, and with the hops, coming new grown hops, new harvest hops are always exciting to see how they're coming out, and because particularly for us, because we do focus on Australian grown hops.
Mm.
with all of our core beers. And so, yeah, we're always excited when we get that opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, yeah, meeting brewers and other people at the Winston as well is always a good time.
It was pretty fun. I do remember we had some someone brought some blocks of Aussie hop flowers to the pub, and there was like one of those table arcade games, and it just turned into like this sensory table, and there was us, you and I, there was some brewers over from the US, and there were some local brewers as well. And we all started rubbing and sniffing, and hops just expand, and the smell got everyone in this pub. No one had an idea what was going on, but you could just, as the waft of the aroma moved throughout the pub, everyone's head started turning. And I think after about 20 minutes, we had whole lot of passionate punters coming over and
Asking some questions.
yeah.
Yeah.
What do you got there?
Yeah. Yeah, because they probably thought it was something else, to be honest.
It's hops. I swear it's hops.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So, Scotto, what was your background before? So you are a founder, and I guess we'll get into that a bit later. But before you got into you were part founder or co-founder of Hobart Brewing Company. What was your brewing background?
Well, I moved here with my wife, Kate, who is Australian. We moved to Tassie, or moved to Australia in December 2009. And by February, we were down here on the Apple Isle, which
Mm,
I like to refer to more as the Hoppy Isle, but
mm,
since the hops are grown down here. Um, and we moved here from Colorado, Boulder, Colorado. And at the time, I started my brewing career much later in life than most. Geez, I would have been in my mid 40s, I think.
mm,
And I had just been traveling, or Kate and I had been traveling, got back to Colorado. I was jobless. I had been which was planned, we had been traveling for a year and a half. And um, I was one of those home brewers, in a long, long, long time ago, and used to, I was a suit and tie guy going to work, in another lifetime. And so when I got back to Colorado, or we got back to Colorado, it was like, this is my opportunity. If I'm ever gonna, take a chance at getting into commercial brewing, this is it. And I literally walked around to 8 different breweries on a day, knocking at their back door, and gave my 30-second spiel. And I got 7 rejections.
yeah.
And one brewery, Oscar Blues, said, "Yeah, come be here at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and we'll put you on the canning line."
Sick.
And within a couple of months, the guy who was operating the main, I guess, canning supervisor was what they called him. This is craft beer's like first canning line. It was a cask 5 head filler, doing 28 cans a minute. And so, cask was just getting into that market and
What
using
year was
Oscar.
this? Sorry, Scott.
This would have been 2005, 2006, 2005 going into 2006. And the canning supervisor one day walked out, and the next week I was the canning supervisor. And yeah, Oscar Blues was doubling in their production by the week. And they were, I'm going to talk in barrels. They were 2,000 barrels when I started, which would be, say, roughly around 200,000 liters.
Yeah.
And by the year end, they were over 500,000 liters. And, on a canning day, we'd have a delivery truck, you know, outside waiting for us to can. And, we'd be canning 70 heck at a time. And with that cask filler, it took us 12 hours. So that truck driver would be there for lunch. And then Oscar Blues is also a brew pub. So they just kept feeding them and the drivers, lunch and then dinner. And we'd finish up around 6 o'clock and then finally get the truck loaded and they'd be off.
Mm.
And, this was happening 5 days a week. It was insane. And like Stone and Wood, it was one beer.
Yeah. So was it Dale's Ale or did that come later?
Dale's Pale Ale.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I've had that when I was in Denver. I've been to Denver. When was I there? 2019, and it was everywhere at the craft brewers conference.
yeah. They had amazing growth, and now they have three different breweries. They have one in Austin, Texas, and one in Asheville, North Carolina. And
Yeah, and they did they consolidate as well? Did they join the Kaneki?
yes,
Yeah.
they did. Yep, yep. And then from Oscar Blues, I went to a small family of brew pubs in Boulder called Mountain Sun, and yeah, I was there for a few years before Kate and I pulled the pin in Colorado and came over to Tassie.
You only live in beautiful parts of the world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Beautiful places where I can play in the outdoors.
Yeah, I bet there's a bit more sailing in Tasmania than there is in Colorado.
Yeah, that's right. We traded skiing for sailing.
So you finished up in Boulder, you moved over to the Hop Isle, as it's now affectionately known as. And then what? Like, did you know anyone when you landed? And did you start a brewery straight away, or did you work in another brewery?
No, so Kate and I came over to Tassie in 2007 during winter time because we had heard how Tasmanian winters, oh my God, and
Hmm.
and so we came over to check it out to see for ourselves before we kind of moved forward with thinking about moving over here. Um, but before moving here, and while we were here in 2007, there were a few breweries that had opened up. Moo Brew, Iron House, 2 Meter Tall had started up. Yeah, so we did a bit of a brewery tour where we could, and so before moving over in 2009, I emailed OJ at Mubrew. I emailed 2 Meter Tall and Iron House and a couple others. And OJ was the only one that wrote an email back and said, "Oh, glad to hear you're coming over. Unfortunately, we got a full team and everybody's happy and don't have much work for you. Good luck with your move." And then a couple of months or right before we were getting on the plane to come over, I get another email from him say, "Hey mate, when you land in Tassie, here's my mobile number. Give me a call." And we came over around Christmas time. Uh, Kate's family was having a kind of a big Christmas reunion, and up in New South Wales. And as we're getting ready to leave, I was looking through some classifieds, and Murray's was looking for a brewer. So on our way from New South Wales to drive down to catch the Spirit, I stopped in at Port Stevens and interviewed with Sean,
Yeah,
and
wow.
yeah, for a brewing job
So
there.
Sean Sherlock from Foghorn, who we
Yes,
did our first podcast with. There you
that's
go.
right.
Small
And
world.
I was standing in his brewery, and I had sweat dripping off every fingertip.
Yeah.
And I had come from winter in Colorado, and now I'm in New South Wales some midsummer, and it was so hot. And anyway, um, got down to Melbourne, ferry across, and another job popped up on the radar down in Dover.
Mm.
And I called up before we got on the Spirit, and they said, "Yeah, come on down." So we literally got off the Spirit, drove to Dover, which was near the end of the road. And over a few months, I actually got a job to start a brewery in the Dover pub. And ex-rugby player from Queensland was behind it.
Mm.
But anyway, on Friday afternoons, I started driving up. Kate and I would drive up to Hobart as the Mubrew team was knocking off, and so we'd have beers with them, and I was getting to know them. And literally the day I got a call from the rugby player in Queensland, with the Dover pub, he said, "Mate, I hate to tell you, but I'm out of money. You're out of a job. Sorry, good luck," kind of
Yeah.
thing. That afternoon, coincidentally, OJ called me up and said, "Hey, how would you like to come brew at Moo Brew?"
Yes, that's amazing. So that's such a coincidence, and so many veterans of the like I've got stories not dissimilar, and I think so many people have been in the beer industry for many years have got similar sort of stories of trying to get employment and juggling and a project falling over, but they had so many leads out there that another one
Yeah,
kept them in the
yeah,
industry at the same time.
that's right. One door closes, another opens.
Yeah, so you worked in at iconic Mubra for a while, and then
Yeah,
what?
5 years.
5 years, wow. And you would have been brewing, I guess, the Pilsner back then. Probably
Yeah.
probably the Hef. No, the Hef would have been a bit after you.
No, no, it was the pills, hef, the dark ale, the pale,
The single
and
hop.
no, that came. They were putting that into production right as I was leaving.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah, and of course the iconic Velvet Sledgehammer.
Right, absolutely. Yes. Beautiful name for a beer too, for a beautiful beer.
Yeah.
So 5 years working, you're comfortable, and then how did the concept of Hobart Brewing Company come up, and what got it rolling? Like, how did you actually go from concept to starting a business?
Um, One day I was down on the floor brewing, and Dave McGill, who was then head brewer at Moo Brew, called me up into his office. And Dave never did that. You know, if there was any issue or anything going on the floor, you just dealt with it then and there on the floor. And
Mm.
so you never went up to the crow's nest. You know, their office looks down on the production floor.
Nice
And
and hierarchical. Perfect.
yeah, yeah. So I'm
Level. Great.
walking up the steps, trying to think, what I'd done wrong over the past 24 hours. And anyway, he said a guy by the name of Brendan Parnell came by the other day, and he had a business plan to start up a brewery, and he's looking for a brewery or a brewer. And he says, I've looked over a lot of business plans for a brewery, and this one looks like it'll work. And I wouldn't be a mate if I didn't let you know of the opportunity. And my initial thought was, "Oh, are you trying to get rid of me?" And anyway, I got Brendan's number, and we got in contact and met over a couple of beers, and started. That started the conversation. And he brought along his business plan. He had already, was considering the name Hobart Brewing,
Mm.
and even had the first name of the first beer, which is Harbor Master. So he didn't have a beer, but he had the name for an idea for a beer.
Mm.
And I actually tried to talk him out of it, and I gave him a lot of reasons why I thought it wasn't a good idea to be starting a brewery. And by the second beer, I was saying, "Yeah, I'm interested. Let's get going."
Yeah. And interestingly enough, Dave McGill now has his own brew pub in Tassie called Deep South as well. And
That's right.
I didn't know that story, but it doesn't surprise me. That's super cool. So you're essentially, through connections, you're approached by someone who wanted to start a brewery. Um,
Yeah.
so how long did it take from, let's say, concept to mashing in your first batch of beer?
Yeah. So, oh, that we because I was brewing at Moo Brew, and because we were actually going to plan to build a brewery, Dave McGill actually offered for us to start brewing Harbor Master at Moo Brew, and so that gave us some time. So from the time that we started talking to going forward, we was probably, I'd say, a good 6 months
Mm.
before we mashed in that first Harbor Master at Moo Brew.
Right.
Um, and then over the course of that next year, that would have been my fifth and last year. We did 370 hect batches of Harbor Master, and then we introduced a second beer for winter, a rye porter,
Yeah.
and we brewed probably 35 heck of that. So, so and it was obviously all kegged and only sold in pubs, around Hobart.
What
So
year
that
was
was
what year was that? Sorry, Scott.
that would have been the first Harbor Master tapped was at Lark
Right.
Distillery down on Davy Street.
Yep.
11 o'clock in the morning on November 8th, 2014.
There you go.
Yeah, so we're coming up to 10 years.
Yeah, amazing.
And yeah, and so we
Big
had
achievement.
5 pubs that day that were launching Harbor Master throughout the day. So we were able to do a bit of a pub crawl that ended up at the Winston,
We're
as
all good pub
as
crawls.
it does.
So you walked up the hill basically. For those
Yeah,
who don't know Hobart, Lark is pretty much at sea level or just above, and then
that's
to get up
right.
to the Winston, it's quite the walk.
A bit of an effort. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so then we, in that year that we were brewing or at Moo Brew, we brought another person in the mix, Donald Gallagher, and he's an architect slash builder. And um, we started looking around Hobart for a place to actually, put some stainless. And we had a meeting with Voss. At the time, they were building Mac 1 down on the waterfront, which
Mm,
is a hotel and some restaurants. And they had a space available looking out onto the water where we were talking to them about doing a brew pub. But it was so restrictive, it wasn't going to work. We knew right away it wasn't going to work. And so when we walked out of the meeting, we walked down the street, walked around the corner, and there in front of us was this empty red tin shed. And
yeah,
we all stopped and we looked at each other and said, "That's the spot."
that
And
is
so
the spot, man. Yeah,
yeah, and so over the next 6 months, Brendan, who is a lawyer by trade and specialized in real estate, found out that Macquarie Point Development was the landlord of the space, and over the next 6 months, he negotiated a lease, and we moved in. One year, almost, well, November 1st, 2015. So about a year from the tapping of our first beer. And but the catch was Macquarie Point, as you may or may not know, was an area that was getting ready to be redeveloped, but they didn't really have a master plan. And so we were only able to sign a 3-year lease when we started.
mm,
And so we thought that the risk having that short term lease was it was worth the risk to take because of its location. And here we are 10 years on, and we still have a lease with them, but now we are starting to count down, and we can get into that a little bit later on.
yeah.
But it's been a precarious road because having a 3-year lease and starting a building a brewery leads you to make some, a lot of decisions that maybe you wouldn't make, ordinarily.
Yeah, pretty short term
Yeah.
decisions, I can imagine. Yeah.
Mm.
Can I just ask about, so you've mentioned some of your partners and business structure is really important to this as well. So you talk about Brendan,
Yep.
who's a lawyer specializing in real estate. You talk about, sorry, what was the other partner's name?
Donald
Donald, that's
Gallagher.
right. Donald, yeah, you
Yep.
talk about Donald, who's an architect, and yourself as a brewer. So really amazing skill set, skill matrix there. Did you have any other partners or at startup?
Yes, we had 2 other smaller investors that were, kind of more or less friends of Brendan,
Mm,
and they put in some money, but they initially were probably more involved initially than they are now.
mm.
They're kind of silent now and let things happen. Donald's wife was also involved. And and then later on when we were finishing or fitting out the tap room, we had one of my brother-in-laws is an architect and a friend of Donald's, and he does a lot of pub work and has a contract with CUB for putting in their draft their oh, what's it called? Sorry, I just went blank. Their draft
They're
the
just
Carlton
making.
draft tanks. The
Oh, the big copper tanks.
yes, yes.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
So my brother-in-law is the architect that has done the design work for all the installations around Australia where those have gone into pubs.
Amazing.
Yeah, and so he did some work for us and provided us with some fridges. And being a brewery and a small business and just opening, we were really short on cash, and so yeah, we offered. He got some shares in lieu of being paid, so he's another shareholder.
Great. So was it pretty much just private equity you got your money from?
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of the overall project.
Yeah.
No, we were 50% equity from the shareholders,
Yeah.
and then we were able to secure a loan from State Growth for the other half. So all up, we opened our doors on $800,000. Um, and again,
Yeah.
it's that 3-year temporary lease. We weren't going to spend a dollar that we didn't need to. And so the fit out at HBC, for people that have been there, I mean, we're two tin sheds that are connected, and we have a saying there that you can't fake real. And if it rains hard enough, you got water cascading down the inside of the walls on one side of the building because the gutters are kind of a science project and filled up. And but we didn't want to spend any money on the sheds because we weren't going to be there. We didn't know how long we'd be there, and even the drainage on the floors. We did pour a slab for the cool room. We poured a slab for the brew house, but the fermenters and the bright tank, the cellar was just on bitumen that was in one of the sheds, and it
Yeah.
had a slight angle to it, and so and it sloped outwards as well. So it had double slope that went back to a roller door. So that ended up being our floor drain. So we didn't put proper drains in. We just let gravity do it and a squeegee. And
On gravel.
yeah, yep.
Oh man, that's a nightmare.
Oh,
That poor
totally.
squeegee. I feel for the squeegee more than the brewer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it didn't last too. I mean, I think we got would have gotten 7 years before it just had disintegrated, from the chemicals. So
Sure.
we finally have put a slab in and a proper drain, but it did take 7 years to get to that point. And it's just one of those things where you're watching every penny that you're spending, and I'll keep going back to that, not knowing how long we're going to be there. But I remember we were getting ready to open. I was literally kegging our very first batch of beer, and Donald walked in, and it was during the hop harvest, and Donald walked in. He was doing some work outside, and he says, "Oh, there are a couple of guys here from some brewery in California, Bear something."
Mm.
And I said, Bear Republic? Yeah, that's it. And he goes, yeah, the brewmaster's here. And he said, and I said, let him in, bring him in. And so I don't remember his name, but the brewmaster. And then he had his top quality assurance guy with him, and they were here for the hop harvest. And,
Yeah.
and I'm literally kegging pre-mail, very first beer ever to come out of the
Still on
press.
tap.
Not on tap yet, no. And
No, but it's still on tap today.
oh, it is. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And I said, "You guys want a beer?" And they looked at their watches, and it was 10:30 in the morning. They said, "Yeah, sure." And so I poured them each a schooner out of the bright tank, and we just started talking. And And then they were really interested in the hops. And so, I had all the fermenters were full with different beers. So I was giving them samples out of the fermenters. And then they're looking around, and the brewer is, wow, this place really reminds me of somewhere of a brewery in Portland, Oregon. And then he looked over at our bar, and we had grain bags as lampshades over the lights over our bar. And he pointed to those and he said, "Oh, you ran out of money, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, you're not wrong." Yeah. So,
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I guess if we fast forward to now, I guess we've spoken about the acumen of your collective shareholders. And right now, I know that you've got to the point where you've got a pretty mature board of management. You've got three independent ASIC directors and an experienced
yep.
PM. I imagine that didn't start overnight.
No.
Can you tell us like how that's impacted the structure of the business and how that's affected the way you work?
Yeah. So, in those early days, we were shareholders, we were employees in the business, and we were the board of trust. We were the board members. And so, the we did strive to get advice on proper governance,
Mm,
but it was clear that we generally board members are they're paid for their role, and we were certainly not in a position to be able to afford to do that. And so for the first 2, maybe 3 years, it was just the shareholders kind of doing everything. And um, it was kind of difficult, because it was really difficult to have a vision, because with the governance, the shareholders should they have the vision and the money. The board, is responsible for giving the shareholders a return and making sure that vision, or work towards that vision happening. And then you have a GM that reports to the board. Well, we were all those things wrapped up in one.
mm,
And so I think fortunately for us, we had a good venue, because we had a big outdoor area and a fire pit, so that attracted people. The beers were well received, and so we had some factors that helped us as a business. It was not that it was through no fault of ours. I mean, we put all this together, but as far as the governance side, it got pretty sticky really in the beginning, and the relationships between the shareholders during different times became strained, because of when you start putting your house on the line, and when we had the state growth loan, and it was just really hard. And the to be honest, in the early days, the Mona used to do Dark Mofo, the big winter festival in June.
yeah,
Well, they started a thing called Dark Park. And
yeah.
Dark Park, they had installations all over Macquarie Point. And then the exit point of Dark Park was literally at our front door. So for 10 days of Dark Mofo, those first 2 years, those first 2 winters that we went through, we had 100,000 people over 10 days, coming out of, walking around Dark Park, and all of a sudden they're at our door, and, oh, let's go have a beer. And so those 10 days were the biggest 10 days of our year. And, that injected enough cash in those 10 days for us to survive the winter, and then have another go at, making hay while the sun shines in summer. And, it probably took 3 years before we were comfortably, the cash flow was starting to be less stressful, and payroll wasn't so hard. And then I think at that point, we brought in Troy, who was a friend of Brendan's.
Mm.
And so he, came in with small business expertise and ideas, and was an outside voice as well. but it's still, I think, trying to think, I'm going back in years. So it was probably not until the fifth, maybe even going into the sixth year before we really seriously talked about having a proper board.
Yeah.
And Brendan was returning to law, and did so in that September. And then right away, we went out and got two more people on board. We got OJ and then Anthea as well. And she had big beer business experience from working with Bogues as their marketing director. And at that point, then once we had the board in place, then we went out and headhunted, or not headhunted, but did a search for a GM, and that's when we got Greg Butterworth. And so, yeah, so I look back at those early years, and there was a lot of headbutting, and we didn't get along all the time. It wasn't the same. How do I say it? In those early days when we're standing around having beers and talking about what we want to do, everybody's great mates and we all have the same idea, and it's going to be easy and all that. But when you actually, the pressure's on and everybody's homes are at stake, or, against the state growth loan, it was hard going those early days. But as soon as we got the board in place, and that just took pressure off the shareholders, and then I was the last shareholder to be an employee, or working day to day. And I think for me, I went to work each day as an employee, not as a shareholder. And yeah, I think that made all the difference for me, because I reported to the GM. I wasn't the top guy, so it didn't matter that I was a business owner or not. I could still get fired. And so, yeah, so I definitely had an employee hat on, during working hours.
Totally appropriate, man. That sounds that's thank you for explaining that in such clear terms, because I can imagine that tension, putting your house on the line with a business, and everyone's conflict of interest, and just having the importance of having independent board members who don't have their house on the line, who are really experienced to be able to put their heads together and make sound decisions without that fog of what might happen behind the scenes. So that's cool. Was the curious, I'm just thinking about issues that impact people starting up breweries today. Was the excise rebate a thing when you started up your brewery, or?
Yeah, no, when we started up, it was the lower rebate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, and I can't remember what year the when it jumped up to $350,000, but that certainly, in those early years, we wouldn't have been that much over rebate at the $100,000 mark. And our growth was organic, and being in Tassie and brewing for Tassie, it's a small market to begin with, so we were growing. And it was a big jump once we started production in our own brewery, versus that first year of brewing four batches at Moo Brew. But that first, I want to say, first 2 years, year and a half, we were keg only.
Yeah.
We did no packaging.
Which would have helped your excise rate as well, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And then we actually had a batch of our extra pale brewed up at Hawkers, and they bottled it for us. So this is before, canning really took off. But that was a really expensive exercise for us, because all of our beer was, in Melbourne, and we had to, have it brewed, packed there, and then we shipped it back down to Hobart to sell. And so, that definitely wasn't a good model. And East Coast Canning was just getting ready to come on. getting started, and I emailed him the first day I, heard about East Coast canning. Oh, mate, can you come down to Tassie? I'd love to have our beer canned. And they eventually did come down, and they were great.
So
They
they put
committed
the mobile canning line on the Spirit.
on. They did, yes,
Wow. Came over the
and
water
then
and drove down to Tassie and got on it. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah, and they, they were committed with it, and they would do plan like a 2 week trip, and they would do a circuit of Tassie and do as many breweries as would put their hands up to be canned. And so we'd can 3 different SKUs over 2 days, and they were long days. And then, that's probably when our volume, really went up, because, we were selling X number of kegs. Now we have a commitment where we're able to can our core beers as well. So, that almost doubled our production in a year. Um, and yeah, and then COVID hit.
Have you ever thought about starting your own craft brewery? At the Brewers Institute, we have an online course packed with advice from the founders of the Brewers Institute for people wanting to reduce risk, save time and cost in opening a brewery. Go to thebrewersinstitute.com. I'm just thinking back to the start again. You're saying you set up your brewery for 3 years because you might have been kicked out after 3 years, but then you're talking about volumes doubling and doubling it and doubling. It sounds like it went pretty hard. How did you decide when you started your equipment, did you need to upgrade your brewery, or did you start off with growth in mind when you started your brewery? So you scaled the equipment according to, your numbers, your projections.
The brew house we went with, so early on, before we built our own brewery, one of the great things that happened for me at Moo Brew was I got to meet a lot of legendary brewers on the mainland. Some of the Brad Rogers, Dave Benoit, and Jane Lewis, Ben Bridge Rose, and
Ben Krause,
Ben Krause, and so just met a lot of amazing brewers and people, and so I arranged for Brendan and I to fly up to Melbourne and meet with Dave Benoit, and this is before Mountain Goat had sold, and then after Dave, we went and spent time with Jane Lewis, and who had just started Two Birds, and they both were really generous with their time and really honest, about everything to think about, and Dave said that he and Cam didn't pay themselves a real wage until year 7, in their journey. And
wow.
And when we were sitting with Jane, I was really interested in her equipment, because she was on we call it a 20-hect brew house, but technically it was a 17 and a half. And it was a DME system, and the mash tun was oversized. And so, you could fill up the mash tun and brew high gravity, and then dilute down to, whatever gravity you're targeting to get more out of your brew house. And I thought, oh, that kind of clicked, and I really latched onto that idea. And so when we found out that we were only gonna have a 3-year lease, I of course wanted a steam brew house and mash tun. But with the time frame and commitment and the money we had, and maybe having to move after 3 months, we weren't going to spend money on steam.
Absolutely. So that adds so much more money between your boiler and your steam delivery system. It adds so much more to your initial capital expenditure. So it's fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and infrastructure too,
Yeah.
we ended up going with the exact kit that Jane had at Two Birds, and including the fermenters, so that saved us money on the AS 1210, the pressure rating requirement, and
So it was an electric system you went with, was it, or direct fire? Sorry.
Direct fire.
Yeah.
and electric element in the hot liquor tank. And yeah, and so as far as our capacity, we started with four 40 hec fermenters and a 40 hec bright. But we had a lot more space left in the shed where the cellar is, so we had room for more tanks. So, and again, with that mash tun on that kit, we could get 600 kilos in it. Um, and so,
That's a lot of
we
grain. Yeah,
oh
absolutely.
yeah, and
Yeah.
depending on the beer, we can push 27 heck out of that brew house, and so
For brewers, for listeners of ours who haven't ever mashed in that sort of thing by hand, that's 24, 25 kilo bags right there. So that's a whole lot of like 8 big grain bags, lifting them off your
yeah.
shoulder and putting them. Now I know your auger is at about waist height or so, or belly button height. Sorry, your grist case and your mill. But
Oh, ours actually isn't. Ours is it's close to shoulder level on me, so it's probably
oh,
one.
really?
Yeah, so it's probably I don't know, 1.4 or 5 or yeah, 1.6 off the ground. So yeah, you definitely have to get the grain up over the shoulders,
That's a
and
lot of work. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, the mill was oversized as well.
yeah.
So fortunately for us.
You can never oversize a mill.
Yeah.
I mean, just get that shit milled, right?
Yeah, that's
That
it. That's
takes
right.
45 minutes or an hour. So you started off at zero and, contract brewing at Moo, to mashing your first batches of Harbour Master and Cream Ale. How many liters would you be at these days, 10 years on?
We'd be producing close to just under around 400,000.
Wow, that's amazing. So most of it's still underneath that excise rebate number.
Yeah, we've just
Bit over, sure, but
yeah, yeah.
it sort of works well. And how many people? I guess when you started, you were talking about you had founders in the business and you were
Mhm.
employee number one. Is that
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
how many people would you have working now?
Full time, we have I think 12 people full time, and then yeah, a number of casuals that work behind the bar.
Yeah, of course. And service behind that bar can pump pretty hard at times. So I imagine you've got quite a few casuals on the books.
That's right. Yes. Yep. Yeah.
So, it's interesting. We talked about, every brewer wants a steam system, right? And you made a decision to go with direct fire. That brewery is still in 10 years ahead of time now. And this year you won Champion State Brewery in Tasmania at the Indies.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a pretty amazing testament to quality right there.
Oh, cheers. Yeah. Well, we've been chasing Moo Brew. I think, yeah, they had a stronghold on the award for the last, I don't know how many years. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was a good night. I'll just say that. And but you're right. It is a testament. And Jane Lewis was winning awards, champion trophies on her system. That again, the same system. Um, and when I was brewing at Moo Brew, that was a DME system as well. They're just well designed, and they're workhorses, and they're designed to be really efficient and easy to use. And but I think also, of course the equipment is important, but it's the processes downstream of making wort on brew day that takes the beer in any number of directions, and hopefully the right direction. But yeah, there's many variables to control.
But it's interesting, like thinking about people looking to start up a brewery, you want all the bells and whistles and that's fine. But what you said is exactly right. You can start off with, maybe not the top tier, but still high quality stuff where you'll spend maybe 25% less. But if you know your processes, you know the technical side of brewing, you can, down the line, you've gone from what was an immature market to a really mature market now.
Yeah, Yeah.
and you're beating some of, not just Australian class, but world-class breweries in that you've got in Tasmania. So yeah, that's really amazing.
Thank you.
Have you
Yeah.
recovered from that night yet, or is it still
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, Kate and I have a 30-foot sailboat, and had sailed it up. One of the great things about Hobart is we can sail our boat up to town, and they have some public moorings or where we can tie up on the waterfront. It doesn't cost a thing; it's free. And so we have an overnight accommodation in Hobart within a 10 minute walk to the brewery.
yeah?
And so so we had the boat up there for the awards night. So yeah, I was recovered. The sail home the next day was a bit rough, but yeah, we had a good night.
Hopefully, it was calm waters at least for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we had extra hands on board to make sure we got home safely. Yeah,
Beautiful, beautiful. So I guess one of the questions I ask people on the podcast is about expansion, but we've spoken about growth with you, and I guess I'd like to. You've alluded to some of the imminent changes in your business.
yeah.
You spoke to the fact that your lease was pretty short term, and now you've got a business that seems to be doing well in the red, and you're based in the Red Shed, and now they've decided that they want to put an AFL stadium right where your brewery is.
How lucky are we?
How
Yeah.
does what's going on there, and what are you gonna like? What's the next step? How do you navigate this?
Well, we're trying to navigate it. We had signed a 20-year lease in the shed known as the Good Shed, which is visible from the Red Shed. And yeah, it must be almost 2 years ago now that they started talking about, or the AFL started talking about a license for a team down here. And then for whatever reason, McLaughlin at the time said, "Yep, you can have your team, but the stadium has to be built at Macquarie Point." And so our lease was terminated by our landlord, which is Macquarie Point Development, which is part of state growth. And we negotiated, which we have over the years to still be there. We're in the Red Shed until June 30, 2026. So about a year and 9 months to go. And yeah, we're in the process of looking for another site. And whether or not it's, at this point, it might be that production and tap room separate.
Hmm.
We might not be, Hobart is limited in what's available. And, within the city, we talked about Dave McGill and Deep South, and Chris Miles with Winston Brewing Company. He had a brewery and he moved it to another site in North Hobart, closer to the pub, and Overland, which is up the road from Dave, and they were all delayed by problems with city council, and you know um, and so we're under this time frame that each day that goes by, that's one less day we have to get something else up and running. And so yeah, we're not we've been in negotiation with a bunch of different sites that haven't really panned out.
Hmm.
So we just keep kind of looking around and um, trying to go forward. But at the same token, you know, whether the stadium is and team is really going to happen or not is, you hear different things in the news and you hear different things on the street. So, yeah, we've weathered so many different expiry dates on our lease with the Red Shed, and here we are almost 10 years on. So there's part of us that think thinks that maybe there'll be another extension, but we're certainly not relying on that happening. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so it's it's almost like we're a business without an exit plan. We're just trying to have a plan to be able to survive and keep going and doing what we're doing. And and then the other interesting part of this is, we're not going to be able to recreate the red shed, and that's what we're known for. We're known for this big outdoor area. It's probably the largest outdoor beer garden in Hobart, and we have a big fire pit.
And it's so iconic. Like, you'll be there, you're having a beer in the big front yard, and you can see a cruise ship, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
to your
yeah,
right, and there's water all around you, and you're within walking distance of a CBD, yet it's the size of, it's got to be an acre or something. It's massive. So it's a
yeah,
really
yeah.
unique, even around the world, that brew pub. It's very individual. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and food trucks around as well that we don't have to look after. They're their own entity and with their own arrangements with Mac Point, and so we haven't had to worry about food. Um, oh, and that this is kind of digressing a little bit, but in those early days, the other thing we didn't have to worry about with the tap room was putting in toilets because Mac Point developed that whole outdoor area, Red Square, and they put the toilet block in for that. So that solved our problem there. So that was a big cost savings,
A
as well.
brewery without a toilet. That's very
Yeah. That's right. And yeah, so that's the other part of our challenge is when we move, what do we do? We're going to have to rebrand ourselves? Do we try to keep a similar vibe, and how do we do that? And one of the things we're looking at as we look for tap room space is, an outdoor area, and it's mind-bogglingly challenging.
wow. Best of luck with that is all I can say. It sounds like you've got a long runway, but a year and 10 months is not a huge
Yes.
amount of time. So
No.
I wish you and all your stakeholders the best in that process, man.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
You touched a bit on marketing and branding actually just then, or branding specifically. Your brand really is, almost immovable, right? Like you there? I feel I've lost you a little bit.
No, no, I'm here.
Okay, it was just a picture. So your brand is almost immovable. It's one of those brands that's um, so well connected to your actual location, your Hobart Brewing Company. You are in Hobart. How important has that been? How important has marketing and branding been to your brewery's success to date?
I think it's a big part of the success of the business. When we were starting up, and Brendan, had already kind of settled on the idea of Hobart Brewing, but when he, Donald, and I were all together and getting really ready to make it official, we were wondering why in the 200 years of brewing in Tasmania, there had never been a Hobart Brewing Company.
Yeah.
And so we were starting to scratch our heads and have doubts and thinking, geez, what are we not picking up on here? And but and we went forward. And then also I think the name of our first beer, Harbor Master, it just suits again our location on the water. And I think for us, the branding is pretty solid. It really suits Tasmania. And when we started up, we never started up as we never called ourselves a craft brewery. We from day one we always referred to ourselves as an independent brewery.
Hmm.
We just weren't as big as the guy up on the hill, Cascade, and um, we set out to brew beer for everyone and not just be a craft brew hero kind of brewery, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and so, when we opened up our tap room, we wanted a beer that would be suitable for anybody who walked through our doors, whether it was a hardcore Cascade lifetime, Cascade draft lifetime drinker or a hardened craft beer drinker. We had something available for them. And but telling that story and keeping that story being retold without it sounding like it's being retold,
Hmm.
I think is takes somebody who's like our brand manager is really good at just saying the same thing over again, but in a different way. So subliminally, you're hearing the same message, but you're hearing it in different ways, once a week or a couple times a week. And um, for us, I think that branding has been really important and in a sense, kind of easy. I mean, we're Tasmanian and we kind of, just we're not trying to be anything else. We're let the beer do the talking and let's tell a story is, as basic as it kind of gets.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I used to be head brewer for a brewery called Sydney Brewery.
That's
So
right. Yep.
I can sort of understand really different circumstances and marketing around it, but nonetheless the same sort of thing, appealing to your local market.
Mm,
Um, Wow, that's really interesting. So you talked about the fact you don't have an exit strategy.
yeah.
That's pretty ballsy. Like, going in with it's almost like the exit strategy had you with a 3-year lease, and the exit strategy still has you with these potential leases terminating in your face.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's intentional that we don't have an exit plan. It's certainly circumstance. And, I've recently retired um, and I still, I was up at the brewery today and, talking with Alex Grant, who's the head brewer, and we're talking about some of the challenges he's having and, with the canning line and they're getting ready to do their first triple brew day.
Sweet.
So three brewery turns in a day. And
3 brew turns on a day on a 2 vessel system.
yes,
Yeah, that's going to be a big day.
that's what I told them. and but we were talking through it and they do have the ability to pull the pin, before they commit to the third brew if it's taking longer than they thought it might. Um, so I do like having that connection and going up there, but personally, I'd also like to kind of move on and not have to have certain worries like, are we going to find a place to keep brewing beer and all that. Um, but that's the catch 22 until we do have a site and a bona fide lease and we're settled somewhere, all the shareholders are kind of, hamstrung and tied to the business until, something else happens. So yeah, I think I don't worry about it. It is what it is, and we can't worry about it. And fortunately, we're in a strong position in that the brewery is debt free, and our production level hasn't really dipped. It hasn't. Our growth has stopped over the last 2 years, but we're holding steady. We're
Mm.
not losing ground. So I think we've done pretty well, and with the way the economy has been these last 2 years, I think we're still performing pretty well. And we made a decision to put profitability over growth. So we're not chasing growth. We're happy where we are.
Mm.
Um, and have that focus on landing a new site. And then I think, yeah, the shareholders can start thinking about their own exit plans. But because I think, it's been a good run and everybody, the shareholders are now, this period of time, we're getting along better than we ever have as a group of shareholders.
Mm.
And and it's really good because all days are stressful in a sense with operating a small business and a brewery, but certainly now with our deadline, we have some real stresses, but we're all in this together, and communicating a lot better and having long talks that are actually leading towards decision making. So I think that helps a lot too, in our situation, that we're all on the same page and, really working together to get to that next place. So then each of us can think, what we want, for our rest of the time of being involved in the business.
Amazing. I guess finally I'll ask about your retirement. You just noted that you were in the business for what, like 9 years full
Yep.
time, and I mean full time plus. I guess it would have been. How did you get to the point where you could step out of your business, and how did it feel?
I've actually, the last 2 years or 2 years before I retired, I started cutting back, and was, well, semi-retired, I guess you would say. And when Greg Butterworth took over as GM, his second week onto the job, the world shut down with COVID.
Wow.
And so um, one of his strengths that he brought with him to the business is his understanding of people and what makes them tick and what makes them happy at work and all of that. And then he works with that knowledge to put those people into roles that make them more efficient, and but also more happy and satisfied in their job. And with me,
Mm.
we're similar age, and one of the first things he said when he got here is, "I'm here to look after you to make sure you don't hurt yourself." And then it was actually him that started talking about, what would you think about, you ready to retire? Would you think of cutting back your hours and maybe work 2, 3 days, 4 days a week? And we started talking about it and settled. I started at 4 days and then went down to 3 days. And, I made that comment about Dave and Cam at Mountain Goat, how they didn't pay themselves a real wage until year 7. Well, I hadn't gotten a pay raise in the, I guess, first, it would have been 7 years.
Mm.
I stayed at the same level, and we used the money to give everybody else pay raises, to hold on to good people, and that was all right because for me, I had to, as a shareholder, I had another potential reward coming on down the track, so that was fine. And so what we did is I just did fewer days, but I kept my same wage that I had working 5 days.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my pay
Cool.
raise.
I'll
Yeah.
take that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the other side of that, as you know, when you're in a brewery, which is really a small, yeah, X number on your team, the only way for anybody to gain more responsibility or get a raise is for the top guy to leave. And so part of me, going to halftime was handing over the day-to-day decision making to Alex. And so I went from head brewer to founding brewer, and then Alex went from lead brewer to production manager,
Mm.
and then but he was essentially head brewer. He was making all the decisions, doing all the scheduling, ordering, everything, dealing with people, and I was just
Which he's really good at.
oh, it was awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was so
Yeah.
good,
He's a
and
superhuman being. Yeah.
yeah, and I'd help out where I could, and when they were having a canning day, I'd be on brew deck brewing, and but mostly I wasn't on the floor anymore, and what do they say, then you've made it as a brewer when you don't brew anymore, and and yeah, and then shortly after, yeah, we just cut through it, and he just had the title head brewer, and yeah, and so that just, I guess when that happened, Yeah, I guess my energy was really starting to get excited about the concept of retiring. And so, but then when it actually happened, I turned 65 last January, and yeah, and then I had a operation on my hand in February, and it's been a slow recovery. And so the beginning of my retirement wasn't all that exciting. It was more uh, rehab with my hand and all that. And then I had another bout of COVID in March, and so I had a very slow, boring start to retirement. But now I'm starting to catch up. And
Well, you've got that 30-foot sailboat
yeah,
that's got a free mooring right next to the brewery. So hopefully it's
yeah.
great
Well,
for you, man.
we definitely have plans for the proverbial sailing off over the horizon. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Amazing. Scott, I think we'll tie it up here. I think we could talk for hours
Yeah, yeah.
about your story. I wish I could ask you more questions about some of the intricacies, but I mean, I've learned so much during this podcast. This has been amazing. So thanks so much for your time. And for anyone going to Hobart, I definitely recommend dropping into Hobart Brewing Company to try as many beers as they can, responsibly, of course.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure and good fun having a chat.
Thanks for listening. We'd really appreciate if you could leave an iTunes review or rating or follow us on Spotify. It'll help aspiring brewers find our cast and hear the journey of our great guests.